When you think of King Arthur, you probably think of magical swords, wizards, and knights in shining but historically inaccurate armor. The 2004 film King Arthur, starring Clive Owen, presents quite a different picture. This is one of the few films about the legendary British hero that attempts to be historically accurate. Rather than portraying Arthur as a medieval king engaging on a quest for the Holy Grail or fighting sorcery, it presents him as a Roman officer leading Sarmatian cavalry, or knights, at the time of the Roman withdrawal from Britain. This is a far more realistic setting than we usually find in films that adapt Arthurian legend. But, despite how accurate the film attempts to appear, how accurate is it really? In this video, we will examine just that by going over the 2004 film King Arthur and breaking down the real history or historical theories that it references, as well as what it gets wrong.
Let history remember that as free men, we chose to make it so.
But before we do, if you'd like to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and hit the notification bell. Just a warning, there will be spoilers for the film in this video, and in the interest of time, we will not be covering inaccuracies in the costumes, props, or set design. Instead, we'll focus on the historical events or historical figures referenced in this film. With that said, let's get started. In the opening of the film, text appears on screen to let the audience know that historians believe that the tales of King Arthur and his knights were based on real people. This is rather misleading. It is true that there are some historians who believe in a historical Arthur, quite a few actually, but the wording on screen gives the impression that this is a general consensus, which isn't true. There isn't really a consensus on the historicity of Arthur, and there are probably just as many historians who believe that Arthur was entirely fictional or folkloric, as there are historians who believe he was historical. As the film establishes the background for the main plot, we are told that the Sarmatians were defeated by Rome and forced to serve as cavalry in Roman Britain, among other locations. This is something that the film gets right, but there is an issue. The exposition here tells us that this happened after 300 AD. In reality, it happened at the end of the First Marcomannic War, in 175 AD. This is when Emperor Marcus Aurelius stationed 5,500 Sarmatians in Britain. It's not exactly clear why the film gets this detail wrong, although it is perhaps to make these events seem more recent within the film's timeline. As the film goes on, however, we are presented with many more chronological issues that make it difficult to work out exactly when in history the film is supposed to be set. Looking at all the chronological information together, it seems to be a collection of historical events and figures taken from the rather wide span of the 2nd to 6th centuries, all blended together into a very loose historical setting that never actually existed. During the film's prologue, we see on screen the setting of 452 AD, while the rest of the film is said to take place 15 years after this, in what would be 467 AD. But is it possible a historic Arthur could have lived during this period? Well, there are a wide range of estimates for Arthur's lifetime. He is often linked with the late 5th or early 6th centuries, usually within a decade or so on either side of the year 500. 467 AD is a bit early for this time frame, but just about fits some theories regarding the historical Arthur's life, such as Geoffrey Ash's theory that identifies Arthur as the British military leader Riothemus, a historical figure who was active around the year 470 AD. The film, however, doesn't appear to take much inspiration from this theory, if any, so the reason they chose the date of 467 AD is unclear. One of the characters in the film, Lancelot, tells us that Hadrian's Wall was built 3 centuries earlier, and since Hadrian's Wall was completed in 122 AD, that would place the setting of the film at roughly 422 AD, but perhaps Lancelot was approximating the date somewhat. It was actually closer to 3.5 centuries earlier. 15 years after the opening sequence, the young Sarmatians we met are now hardened knights in the Roman province of Britannia. They are led by the half-British Roman officer Artorius Castus, who is also known by the Welsh version of his name, Arthur.
Artorius, or Arthur.
The name Artorius Castus is adapted from a true historical figure, a Roman military commander named Lucius Artorius Castus, who served in Britain in the late 2nd century. A theory that was originally proposed by medievalist Kent Malone identified this Roman commander as a possible inspiration for the legendary King Arthur. A number of other scholars added to this by suggesting that Sarmatian cavalry served under Artorius Castus in Britain, and these equites, or knights, were the inspiration for King Arthur's legendary Knights of the Round Table. It is also suggested that the legend of King Arthur was propagated and passed down by the descendants of these Sarmatians who stayed in Britain after their service. However, I should note that other scholars have criticized these theories, as they place Arthur too far from the traditional period associated with him in the late 5th or early 6th centuries. Regardless, these theories clearly inspired aspects of this film, like Artorius Castus' name, as well as his Sarmatian knights, who, in the film, all take their names from knights of Arthurian legend. It might have been more historical to give the knights Sarmatian names like Ban, which also happens to be Lancelot's father's name in Arthurian legend. In the film's opening narration, it is also implied that the name Artorius is a title for the Sarmatian commander. Lancelot says,
"We made our way and reported to our Roman commander in Britain, ancestrally named for the first Artorius."
However, it should be noted that Artorius is actually a family name which refers to the gens Artoria, a family with a long history in Rome. The film's plot really gets going after the arrival of a bishop who is sent by the Pope to speak with Arthur and his men. The bishop in question, Germanus, is a historical figure who really did travel to Britain around the year 429 AD to combat the influence of Pelagius, a British monk and theologian who, like Germanus, is also referenced in the film. We learn that Arthur is a follower of Pelagianism, a theology that stresses free will, in the moral sense, not so much politically as Arthur seems to think. Arthur later learns that Pelagius was killed 1 year earlier.
They killed Pelagius. A year passed.
But in reality, Pelagius was expelled to Egypt in 431 AD, and the exact date of his death is not known. Needless to say, neither the historical Germanus or Pelagius fit the film setting of 467 AD. When Arthur's knights meet Germanus, they believe their 15-year service to Rome is completed, and are surprised to learn Germanus has one final mission for them. In reality, the Sarmatian service to Rome should have been 25 years, as they were non-citizen auxiliaries. Perhaps the Roman soldier who told them 15 years at the beginning of the film was just punking them.
How long shall we be gone?
15 years.
Germanus also casually mentions that Rome has finally decided to withdraw its forces from Britain. But when exactly did the Romans actually leave their northernmost province, Britannia? Historically, this occurred around the year 410 AD, which again is pretty far from the film setting of 467 AD. Not only does the film place the end of Roman rule in Britain at the wrong date, but the scenes between Germanus and Arthur make it clear that Rome is planning a formal withdrawal from Britain. Historically, however, there is no evidence that Rome ever planned to fully withdraw from Britain. What actually happened was that most of the Roman troops in Britain were sent to the continent during the usurpation of Constantine III at the beginning of the 5th century. In 409 AD, the native Britons expelled the remaining Roman administration, and then when Emperor Honorius rejected Britain's appeal for aid in 410, at least according to the Greek historian Zosimus, that was the final nail in the coffin of Roman Britain. It was not a formal withdrawal as the film presents things. Additionally, during Germanus' conversation with Arthur, he refers to the Pope's influence, saying,
"Rome and the Holy Father have decided to remove ourselves from indefensible outposts, such as Britain."
In the 5th century, the Pope was simply a prominent bishop rather than a larger-than-life figure with power over political and military issues. The Pope's role would only resemble this centuries after Arthur's time, and likewise, Arthur's reference to papal armies is inaccurate for the period. The bulk of the film's plot concerns Arthur and his knights' final mission, to recover a Roman family living north of Hadrian's Wall and return them to Roman Britain. The specific reason they are assigned to recover this family is because the son, Alecto, is the Pope's favorite godchild and pupil. We can surmise the mission is all about Alecto by the fact that Arthur gives little to no regard for his father's safety. It is also interesting to note that the family's surname, Honorius, is the same as the emperor who supposedly refused aid to Britain. While at this house north of the wall, Arthur and his knights rescue a number of native Britons who have been imprisoned by the family, including Guinevere. Of course, in Arthurian legend, Guinevere is Arthur's queen, and in most sources, the daughter of King Leo de Grance. In this film, however, she is the daughter of Merlin. Rather than the enchanter of legend, this Merlin is a leader of people at war with Roman Britain known as the Woads. The term Woads seems to be the film's way of saying Picts, as in actual history, the ancient people of Scotland called Picts are thought to have covered themselves with paint or tattoos made from blue woad dye. In fact, all Britons are thought to have done this centuries earlier, but given their location, these people are meant to be Picts. It is widely believed that the legendary character of Merlin is largely based on a bard, madman, and supposed seer of Welsh legend called Myrddin, or sometimes Myrddin Wilt, the Wild. Like Arthur, this figure may be historical, but it is not known for sure. To make things more confusing, there are also several traditions regarding Merthin that are often conflated. In one, he served the British king Vortigern as a prophet at Carmarthen in present-day Wales. In another, he served a northern king of the Britons at Arthairith, likely present-day Arthuret, near Hadrian's Wall in Cumbria. When this king was defeated, Merthin went mad and retreated into the Caledonian Forest in present-day southern Scotland. It's possible this Merthin, who roams the Caledonian Forest, influenced the Merlin we see in this film. However, unlike in the film, Merthin was definitely not a leader of Picts. According to a number of sources, the Picts, along with Gaels, did raid Britain around the end of the Roman era, as well as during other periods, but they had nothing to do with Merlin.
So Rome is leaving.
Arthur, his knights, and the prisoners they rescued soon flee the Roman estate as they are being pursued by another important element of the story, the invading Saxon force. The invading Saxons and their leader, Cerdic, are based on actual history, but again, there are more than a few issues. Firstly, the Saxons did not begin their settlement of Britain with an outright invasion. By a number of accounts, the Saxons and their fellow Germanic tribes, the Angles and Jutes, were first invited to Britain to serve as mercenaries or so-called foederati after the Romans left and the Britons were struggling to defend themselves against the Picts and Gaels. This deal was supposedly negotiated by two Germanic brothers, Hengist and Horsa, who led the Saxons into service for the British king Vortigern. But it's difficult to say how much of that story is legend rather than fact. Regardless, the Saxons did not invade as we see in the film. Secondly, the geography of the Saxon invasion we see on screen is wrong. It is widely accepted that the Saxons first settled in the southeast of the country. That appears to be the land they were granted after arriving in Britain. Some Saxon groups may well have sailed over to other parts of the eastern or southern coasts of Britain during this period, but it was still principally a matter of the Saxons spreading out from the southeast corner of Britain rather than campaigning down from north of Hadrian's Wall like the film would have us believe. Interestingly, the Historia Britannicum does describe a Saxon campaign into Scotland, but clear archaeological evidence of this has not yet been found, and in any case, the text places this long after the start of the Saxon settlement of Britain. A third issue concerning the Saxon conquest in the film is a matter of chronology. Yes, the type of mistake we have now come to expect from this film. The film has the Saxons arrive in Britain just as the Romans are leaving. However, from the monk Gildas near contemporary record, we know that there was a gap between the Romans leaving and the Saxons arriving. Years at the very least, but probably a decade or more. The traditional date of the arrival of the Saxons is 447 AD. However, evidence from the contemporary Gallic Chronicle of 452 shows that the Saxons already controlled a large part of Britain by 441. This indicates that the Historia Britannicum's date of 428 for the Saxon arrival is probably more correct. But regardless, this is long after the Roman departure in 410, as well as long before the setting of this film. There were likely still groups of Saxons arriving at the film's date of 467 AD, but they were far from the first to arrive. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the Saxons' depiction in this film is the implication that they were villainous conquerors or destroyers. As I mentioned earlier, the Saxons didn't really invade Britain, but they are thought to have eventually risen up against their former employers and conquered the land for themselves. I should note, however, that some modern scholars are now beginning to question or refute the traditional view of the so-called Saxon conquest, although there is still debate on the matter. The traditional narrative is supported by records like the Gallic Chronicle of 452 and that of Gildas, who even went so far as to portray the Saxons as a destructive scourge on the land. However, these texts should not be taken at face value, especially considering that modern archaeology does not support this characterization. The Saxon leader in the film, Cerdic, who we will touch on later, prevents one of his men from raping a British woman. He scorns the idea of intermarriage with the natives, referring to the potential offspring as half-people. Throughout the rest of the film, he's also shown as destroying everything in his path. Settlements are set ablaze, women and children are killed along with the men. The evidence, however, does not support this harsh characterization of the Anglo-Saxons. Genetic research has revealed that the Saxons did extensively intermarry with the native Britons. It's not clear quite how much this happened, but the most recent studies show that somewhere between 2/3 and half of the population of England came from the native Britons. Archaeological evidence also shows that there wasn't a mass destruction across all of Britain during the Anglo-Saxon settlement. This doesn't mean that there wasn't any conquest or warring at all, contrary to what is sometimes claimed, but it does mean that the picture presented in the film of the Saxons as outright destroyers is definitely wrong. The battle that makes up the climax of the film is meant to depict the Battle of Mount Badon, at least according to the film's post-battle narration. This is a very likely historic battle, but again, there are a few chronological problems with this depiction. In reality, the Annales Cambriae places Badon at 516 AD. It's also mentioned by Gildas, a 6th century writer, that the Battle of Badon occurred 43 years before the time he was writing, although this is debated by some scholars. Most scholars agree that Gildas was writing in the first half of the 6th century, with the Battle of Badon somewhere within a decade on either side of the year 500. The film also places the battle in the north of Britain by Hadrian's Wall, yet there is a general consensus that Badon was somewhere in the southwest of Britain. As well as being in the wrong end of the country, this battle is also presented as being both the first and last major battle between the Britons and the Saxons. Yet Gildas' near-contemporary description shows that it was actually the climax of numerous battles between two peoples, some of which the Britons lost and some of which they won. The real leader of the Britons at Badon is theorized by some scholars to be a Romano-British military commander named Ambrosius Aurelianus. Aurelianus is mentioned in numerous records, including Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century pseudo-historical Historia Regum Britanniae, or the History of the Kings of Britain. Geoffrey places Aurelianus as Arthur's uncle. However, some historians, like Frank Reno, believe Aurelianus has been conflated with or is the inspiration for King Arthur himself. This may also explain the inspiration for this film to portray Arthur as the victor at Badon. The leader of the Saxons in the film, Cerdic, was likely a historical leader of the Saxons in the 6th century known as Cerdic of Wessex, and he allegedly did have a son named Kinric, just like in the film. Aside from the chronological errors of placing him in the 5th century and having his son die at the same time as him, the choice to make him Arthur's enemy at Badon is actually somewhat plausible. The Saxon leader at Badon is also theorized to be Aella of Sussex, but Cerdic was active in the same general area in which Badon is usually placed by scholars, and the 12th century Historia Regum Britanniae calls Arthur's enemy Cheldric, which could be a corruption of Cerdic. This is not a very popular connection, mostly due to the fact that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle places Cerdic's death almost 2 decades after the date of the Battle of Badon in the Annales Cambriae, but we should remember that both of these records were written centuries after the fact, so these dates can't be viewed as completely reliable. In other words, the seeming inaccuracy about Arthur's enemy in the film might actually be a surprisingly accurate detail after all. Before the battle, as well as throughout the film, Arthur and his knights chant the word Rus, which seems to be a rallying cry for them. But what exactly does it mean? Well, it is likely meant to be a reference to the origin of the Sarmatians, who arose from the Eurasian steppe in what is now Russia. The problem with this is that the Sarmatians were a northeastern Iranian-speaking culture with no connection to the later Rus people. The Rus left Scandinavia to form the Kievan Rus state in what is now Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, and gave their name to the latter. However, they were not active in this area until around the 8th to 11th centuries. Again, this is pretty far from the setting of the film. In the final scene, Arthur and Guinevere are married by Merlin in a stone circle that looks a little like Stonehenge, except that it's by the sea and has these Celtic spirals. Arthur is made king of the Britons, and an alliance is formed between his people and the Picts. Sorry, I meant Woads. In reality, no such alliance was ever made between Romano-Britons and Picts. Not to mention the fact that I'm speaking English right now is pretty good evidence that Arthur didn't completely halt the supposed Anglo-Saxon scourge. Finally, we come to the end of the film. While we covered some major historical inaccuracies in this video, there are definitely more in this film. So please let us know what historical inaccuracies or references you noticed in King Arthur in the comments below. For me, this was an entertaining experiment that attempted to make a film based on theories regarding the historicity of King Arthur. Where it mostly failed is that it attempted to combine a number of theories on the historic Arthur, regardless of their conflicting dates or information. It might have been better for them to simply pick one theory on Arthur and try to be as historically accurate to that as possible. Either way, people still enjoy this film, so let us know if you do in the comments below. If you'd like to see more videos like this, be sure to give the video a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Check out these other videos on the meaning of the 2021 film The Green Knight, and the best King Arthur on film. Also, stay tuned to this channel as we intend to release a video on the 1981 film Excalibur soon. Thanks for watching, and until next time.